Our next guest, Don Style, has been a CUPE national representative for over 20 years. He has developed, presented, and facilitates diversity workshops for cooperatives and other organizations across Canada. He has developed and written cross-cultural communications in combating workplace racism, designed and developed workshops for the African Nova Scotian Community Development Association, and facilitate the first CLC Workers of Color and Aboriginal Conference. He has been a co-chair of the City of North York Union Management Employment Equity Steering Committee, and been part of a working group of achieving representation of CUPE National Executive Board Diversity Seat. Don was also former recording secretary for Coalition of Black Unionists. I would like to introduce a gentleman, a brother, that wears his name, Brother Don Stiles.
Thank you. Thanks. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Yeah. Let me say, in terms of a preamble, that it's always difficult to follow one of your mentors in that of Brother Ken Amoroso. Brother Ken, Brother Peter Marceline, Sister Muriel Collins were some of the stalwarts back in the 1980s who actually allowed what you're experiencing this evening to have taken place in terms of the history of the trade union movement. So, for example, there were never, ever any equality representatives anywhere in Canada. There were never and few folks of color on executive boards. There were none at the national level, and there were certainly none at the provincial division either. And so it was the work of many folk who many have passed away. There are a few that still remain, some who have retired, but worked diligently over the decades to ensure that you are able to not only access, but to be a part of events like this. So this, for those of us who've been around for a while, has tremendous meaning that you can't imagine in terms of representation in local unions, on the provincial level and the national levels, respectively. So I just wanted to say that off the top. And I did yield some of my time to Brother Amoroso, being my mentor. You know, Ken, I will never forget these moments and the moments that we have shared in the past to bring about change, the change we need. And so when you look around in terms of the program of coloring the union, a lot of effort went into that. Some of the pictures around, or some of the folks who were involved in bringing color into the union, into the leadership of the union, and allowing folks of color to have a voice in the union. So this evening, as you know, the theme is embracing the past, the present, and welcoming the future, right? And so I'm going to break it down in a few bite-sized segments. So starting with Blacks in Canada and the birth of Black History Month, which is vitally important to African and those of African descendants, okay? There are some things that we know factually. While people of African descent have been in Canada since the arrival of the Mayflower, and in and through the 20s, the 30s, celebration of Black History Month started in and around the 30s proper. Black History Month took its birth from the United States, where Negro Week was being celebrated. Now, it has been chronicled that the month of February was selected to celebrate Black History Month because it was the birthday of Carter G. Woodson and Abraham Lincoln, who were two pivotal proponents of providing awareness and redress to the plight of blacks. Now, let's bring it to this side of the 49th parallel, if you will, to the Canadian shores. As some may be aware, folks of African descent have been treated disproportionately in Canada. In fact, the former CUPE National President said, we have to and must speak hard truths. And so this is a hard truth. To the extent where an apology has been sought by Canadians of African descent. Now, with respect to the unionized context, now let's give it a unionized flavor, if you will. It is chronicled that slaves have worked in Canada for 2 centuries, and that African Canadian workers are one of the most marginalized in this country. The trade union movement and its programs of social inclusion have assisted in providing a vehicle with or for which equality rights can be advanced for workers of color and those of African descent. Now, the effects of art and academia on Black lives, as Brother Ken reported to you in his discourse. Many of the scholars, such as Robin Maynard, Dr. Cooper, Dion Brand, who chronicled the history of Black women in Canada, Black artists, poets, Black activists, groups such as UNITA, which morphed into the Black Action Defense Committee, who had as its president the late Dudley Laws, and dare I say groups like Black Lives Matter, have propelled the work of inclusion and shed a spotlight on inequality, ill treatment, and the retarding of advancement of people of color, African and African descendants. Now, the impact of unions on Black lives. As you may be aware, there was a painful time in the history of Black people or people of African descent where the thought of being a part of the union was met with resistance. This meant then that Black workers had to form their own unions, such as the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, led by the likes of Bromley Armstrong, Stanley Grizzle. Today, there are bodies such as the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists, which is now international with a Canadian charter body that was received on November the 15th, 1996, and that organization is now led by Sister Yolanda McLean. Now, with respect to demographics, it is reported that 1/4 of the population of the city of Toronto are people of color. It is further reported that over half of the workforce are women, and many are women of color. Now let's look at ties to the historical context. A truism that is often repeated is that we stand on the shoulders of our ancestors. We can flatten that out to say we stand on the shoulders of the trailblazers, the pioneers, of those who have gone, and yet those who still remain. As you may be aware, the Caribbean and West Indies diaspora is made up of many cultures, customs, traditions, but essentially, for all intents and purposes, in keeping with one of the island nations' states' motto, one people. So we can celebrate Zdena Akonde, educator, principal, femtor, Beverly Moskal, entrepreneur, Viola Desmond, the Rosa Parks of Canada, businesswoman, Denham Jolly, the former founder of Flow 93.5, Fitzroy Gordon, founder of G98.7, Jean Augustine, teacher, deputy prime minister, Lincoln Alexander, lieutenant governor, Alvin Curlin, MPP Scarborough North, and former director of student services, Seneca College, Charles Roach, lawyer, legal defense of the Black Panther Party members, Caravana founder, son of a trade union activist, father from Belmont, Trinidad and Tobago, Peter Marceline, planner, City of Toronto, Caravana founder, Muriel Collins, activist, NEB member, of whom the Muriel Collins Co-op is named after, Sharona Hall, tireless advocate, Toronto Community Housing, BADC, or the Black Action Defense Committee member, Murphy Brown, Local 4400, Share newspaper columnist, Judge Michael Tullo, York U grad, Osgood Law School, Harriet Tubman, abolitionist who led numerous enslaved persons to freedom from the northern states and Canada through the underground, Marianne Shadd, first Black newspaper publisher in Canada, Rosemary Brown, staunch feminist and socialist, Canada's first Black female member of provincial legislature, first woman to run for the leadership of a federal political party in 1975 under the banner, Brown is Beautiful. In 1972, elected to Legislative Assembly of BC as an NDP MLA. And as I conclude, Bromley Armstrong. Bromley was concerned about the plight of domestics brought to Canada in the early 1900s and their inability to communicate back home with their families. And most who were not able to apply for Canada Pension without the appropriate birth certificates and proof of age. Folks from the islands will understand that one. Bromley also worked on discrimination in housing, and in 1950, where he and a young University of Toronto student of Chinese origin responded to an advertised vacancy as a test case. Bromley has received many accolades and formed many organizations, not limited to the Urban Alliance on Race Relations, the Toronto Black Business and Professional Association, Ethnocultural Council, and the National Council of Jamaican and Supportive Organizations, which were Jewish organizations, Black organizations, Asian organizations together. Bromley was a factory worker and a trade union activist from the later 1940s onward. And perhaps a little known fact, his daughter, Lana Armstrong, was assistant to a previous Local 79 president prior to leaving to complete her master's studies. And then, in summation, Jean Augustine, first Black female MP and cabinet minister, social justice advocate, teacher, principal, and MTHA, Metro Toronto Housing Authority, board chair from 1988 to 1993 until she entered politics. She was instrumental in getting the Canadian government to play a pivotal role in the World Conference on Racism in Durban, South Africa. Grenadian-born, father, a sugarcane plantation worker, elected first Black member of Parliament in 1993, appointed the first Black woman in cabinet, deputy prime minister, 2002. She founded the Toronto chapter of the Congress of Black Women of Canada, served on a committee to organize the first Caravana Festival in 1967. She introduced a motion in 1995 to have a federal declaration of February as Black History Month for all Canadians from coast to coast to coast. Thank you for your time and attention, and continue to enjoy the remaining events around Black History Month, around the City of Toronto, and in the communities where you reside. Thank you.